And to discuss the topic this morning, we have to welcome some of our guests who are here in the studio. First, we begin with Associate Professor Sherif Gali Ibrahim of the Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja. Well, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigeria.
Yes, and we also have Charles Ononuju, Director, Center for Chinese Studies. So you're welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, then we have joining us via Zoom for this conversation, the Counselor of the Chinese Embassy in Nigeria, is Li Zuda. Mr. Li, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Okay, good morning, Nigeria. It's my pleasure to come here.
All right, ni hao.
Ni hao, your Chinese is so good.
Sure. All right, and then also part of this conversation this morning from our Lagos Network Center, we'd like to welcome Dr. Segun Bolarinwa, is Head Division of Security and Strategic Studies of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs at Victoria Island in Lagos. Dr. Bolarinwa, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, well, gentlemen, you're welcome to the program. 50 years of bilateral relations between Nigeria and China. This has actually expanded and is still growing, both in trade and strategic cooperation. And so our business this morning is to do a review of this relationship, which has been long-standing. And I'd like to ask Sherif Gali Ibrahim to give us his idea of how this relationship has grown and how beneficial it's been for both countries.
Looking at the bilateral ties established on the 10th of February 1971 between the People's Republic of China and Nigeria, is something we can assess and easily argue and assert that it is a kind of a great achievement which the both sides, have gained in divergent areas and ramifications in this particular bilateral relationship. First, to look at the issue of trade and investment, which we just heard of about 47 billion, USD of investment, in the country. Looking at the old way-round trade, between the two countries, as statistics show in 2019, about 19 billion USD. So it's something that we can also argue that in other areas, such as foreign direct investment coming from China, for example, having almost 1,000, enterprises, Chinese companies in Nigeria operating as a result of this particular openness and foreign direct investment and trade liberalization. Then going back to culture, we must live together to understand each other's culture so as to enable peaceful coexistence among our own people, as well as to facilitate other engagement, especially understanding of language, between our own people, as well as understanding the rudiment of our cultural background will actually, increase and expand that particular trust, as well as mutual cooperation between the two countries. And this has actually gone far. And in Africa, looking at the population of Nigeria, you come to understand that Nigeria has that particular privilege of having a highest number of its population, its youth studying in China under the Chinese government scholarship. Then there's a part we've also seen when other countries in the world had actually made a flinch not to support Nigeria in its fight against terrorism. We've seen how China has provided supplies, of this particular military-industrial complex for Nigeria to succeed in its fight against insurgency, especially in the northeastern part of the country. And this is a part you also look at all the areas of development, looking at the infrastructure-driven development which China has recorded, Canada, the US, and most of the European countries. And China has actually consolidated all efforts in making sure that it actually introduces Nigeria into this infrastructure-driven economic development. And that is why Chinese contribution in the construction of airport terminals, roads, railways, in the country through the Belt and Road Initiative. So, telecommunication, apart from telecommunication, even power. You look at the Mambila Zungeru power plant, all these, projects that China immensely contribute to see its progress and, great achievement in the country. Then this apart, we come to discover that when China started romancing politically and economically with Nigeria, it was at a point when Nigeria had already discovered oil. And in 1970, Nigeria began to ignore other non-oil sectors, especially agriculture, manufacturing, and services. And that is why the non-oil sector dropped in 1970. That is 1 year before Nigeria established its diplomatic ties, with China. What happened was that the non-oil sector dropped from 1970 to 2004, from 94% to about 52%. Taking agriculture specifically from, let's say, 41% to 17%, and all services from 45% to 27%. So you can see that the trend, in this particular relationship has been that China has always been trying to capitalize on this particular fruitful relationship under so many umbrellas, such as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, the Belt and Road Initiative, the strategic partnership with Nigeria, and other engagements. And that is why, yes.
All right, Dr. Gali Sharif, thank you very much for your opening salvo. We're going to have the opportunity of elaborating further on the key points that you have just highlighted. I was just wondering, some of our viewers probably would disagree with the point you made that the non-oil sector began to collapse from 1970. Yeah. I think it was the oil boom that came after the Arab-Israeli War of 1973 that everybody now started running away from the non-oil sector, and everybody felt that the oil sector was where to go. So that came in the mid-70s, because I remember in 1970 still, we still talked about cash crops. All right, Gali, thank you very much for that opening salvo, but which is also the entry point for my question to Mr. Charles Onaninjo, Director of Center for Chinese Studies. We are today marking 50 years of Nigeria-China relations. How does the viewer understand why there seemed to have been a decade of delay before ambassadorial level relations were established? Nigeria had our independence in 1960, October 1. China, of course, had our National Day with the formation or establishment of the People's Republic of China, October 1, 1949. So the Republic of China, the People's Republic of China was already in existence 11 years before Nigeria's independence. And now, formal ambassadorial level relations were not established until 10 years later. Why did we have this hiatus that we're now celebrating today and say, look, so charming in our relationship with Beijing?
Well, it's understandable. The route we took to nationhood by both sides is different. Like you know, China was a former colonial, semi-colonial country dominated by imperialism until the founding of the Communist Party of China in 1921. And they took out the road of building a new democracy and then constructing a new democracy along building a socialist country. In 1949, of course, the Communist Party became triumphant and established modern China. Modern China was established firmly on the path of building socialism. And in the context of the post-World War international order, it is very clear that our own orientation, our road to national independence, shepherded by the British, was determined to steer away from anything socialism or communism. If you remember, people, trade union activists, socialist activists were all denied any form of engagement with the socialist bloc, including the then Soviet Union, of course China, which was called Red China. One of the cardinal sins then was to see with Chairman Mao's Red Book. And this was, of course, an artificial barrier erected by imperialism, by imperialist domination, which ensured that Nigeria is not exposed to this trend in the international election. Then, of course, it was self-serving. But the Civil War opened the eyes of Nigerian leadership and the imperative to diversify our global engagement, our international elections. Like you know, the West were ambivalent in supporting a united Nigeria. Some countries like France, that has always felt Nigeria is too big to be managed, was so happy to use its proxy in Africa to see that Nigeria is broken up. The West were ambiguous, ambivalent, not coming, not supporting. And of course, Russians came in, but like the former foreign minister there, Mr. Aripo, said, it was based on commercial transaction. The Russians provided arms and we paid. But after the end of the war, just like former head of state Gowon, who visited China first, who opened, he realized the need to diversify Nigerian engagement globally. He realized the need that our Western-centric foreign policy was not taking us too far. So the need to diversify foreign relations was as a result of the history of what appears like a Western ambivalence on the unity of Nigeria. And of course, China has become an important power. China has broken through. The trend to isolate China has completely failed. In 1964, everybody knows, China blasted its first atomic weapon, breaking the monopoly and ending the nuclear blackmail of the Western powers, which wanted to isolate China. The West kept pretending that China did not exist. They did everything. They kept Taiwan, a breakaway province, which was going by the name Republic of China, in United Nations. Of course, China said, we will not allow two Chinas to sit in United Nations, and insisted on the expulsion of Taiwan before its admission. And that was one of the most historic and very important aspects of Nigeria and China cooperation, that barely 8 months after the resumption of diplomatic relations, or after establishment of diplomatic relations in February 1971, in September, Nigeria, along with other 75 countries in the world, joined to welcome China back to the United Nations by a historic vote at the 26th session of the United Nations. So that was a landmark. So the point was the fear of the so-called Red China, the revolutionary China, was part of the reason why Nigeria, and if you remember, the immediate post-independence Nigerian government was avowedly anti-communist, was avowedly anti-socialist. You remember even Mrs. Fumilayo Kuti, who was invited to China, was explicitly denied a visa to go to China and visit other socialist countries. So Nigerian political orientation, and also China was busy trying to consolidate its revolution. Because like you know, modern China was founded against the will of Western imperialism, who had historically occupied China, who has historically partitioned China, promoted warlordism. As you know, Hong Kong was seized from China on account of forcing China into the opium trade. And China's strategic patience paid off when it allowed the expiry tenure to expire in 1997.
Yeah.
So the fact was, there was a deliberate effort by the West, against whom the revolution was founded, to stifle the young China, to put China in the background. But all this effort collapsed in the face of reality, in the face of the fact that this revolution is people-centered, people-led. The Communist Party was deeply rooted in the people and sprang from the people and broke the long chain of what they call China 100 Years of Humiliation. In 1949, when modern China was founded, imperialism was expelled, and partitioning of China was expelled. Warlordism, partition in China was ended. And that was the new destiny of modern China, which did not...
A good historical background, of China. And within this period, he was talking about China was busy, getting set, for their development. In the 70s, they launched the first satellite into the orbit, right? And today, I'm sure China has over 100, satellites in the orbit, And of course, these are designed, built, and launched in China. All right, now let's go to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, we are talking about 50 years since Nigeria and China have been in bilateral relations. And how would you describe this relationship? I know that today Nigeria is the largest trading partner with China in Africa. And I'm also sure that this relationship has been so beneficial to China. Hence, China has an enormous business establishments in Nigeria and other parts of Africa. How would you describe this relationship?
And Nigeria, bilateral diplomatic in the world. China and Nigeria, we have a strong relations. And we are all aware. We are good friends, good brothers, and half a century. Even as recently last year, China and Nigeria demonstrated their continued commitment to the robust, healthy, dynamic relations. And I think the focus, the Forum on China-African Cooperation, Beijing Summit, and on another hand, from 80% of Nigerian people indicating a positive perception of Nigeria-China relations. Nigeria is clearly one of the most pro-China nations in the world. Last month, Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi just finished his two-day official visit to Nigeria. During that short period,
well, we seem to be having difficulty along the line of communication with Mr. Lee, so we have to disengage him for now and hoping to return to him when the line is through. So, Mr. Lee, we'll come back to you much later. This time around, let's go to Joshua Bolarinwa of the Institute of International Affairs. He is in our Lagos Network Center. Sir, you have listened to other guests, who have made input, to this conversation. And I would like you to come from perhaps your own perspective as to the nature and the kind of bilateral relations that Nigeria has had with China for 50 years now.
Thank you. Nigeria bilateral relations with People's Republic of China since 1971 had moved from the level of mere bilateral relations to what we can call strategic partnership and cooperation. And within this ambit of cooperation, a lot of development issues are taking place which China are driven within these bilateral relations. And majorly had been on trade, investment, infrastructural development, and recently the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which had been made to drive development in Nigeria. China has been trying so much in the area of infrastructure. They have been building roads for us in Nigeria. They have been building rail in Nigeria, development and renovations of our airports, rail, and so many other things. There's a lot of, or a huge investment in trade. China has been bringing, or China has driven trade between this or in this relationship to a very high level. The highest level has been the volume of trade recorded even between 2019 and 2020, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Basically, it has risen to between 19 billion US dollar to 20 billion US dollar in trade. Then there is a lot of Chinese investments in Nigeria that are driving a lot of development. There is also this military industrial complex that China has had with Nigeria. They've been supplying arms in fighting insurgency in the northeastern part of Nigeria. China has also developed a lot of things with Nigeria, and which are aimed at developing our infrastructure. In these provisions, apart from the BRI, even the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs has had a lot of memoranda of understandings with so many Chinese institutes, chiefly Chinese Institute of Contemporary International Relations, the Normal University, and so many other institutes. So China has done a lot for Nigeria, and China has taken the relationship to strategic level, whereby there is mutual benefits between the two countries. Nigeria has benefited a lot in the area of trade, in the area of investment, in the area of infrastructure, which everyone can see everywhere in Nigeria, including roads and rail. Apart from that, a lot of other investments, even in the oil and gas now, apart from the rail, apart from the road, China has also moved into oil and gas. They have done a lot of investments in that area too. China has also been able to develop the cultural relationship between Nigeria and China. If you go to the University of Lagos, there is the Confucius Center. There is also the Chinese Institute of Chinese Studies at the University of Lagos. A lot of Nigerians are there as students learning the Chinese language, trying to build the cultural relations between Nigerians and the Chinese. Apart from that, the FOCAC program, China always encouraged some Nigerian youths, elders, and even the leaders to participate every year when they do the FOCAC summit, which some of us have benefited from. We have participated about 2 or 3 of these programs. So China has done a lot of things, and China has improved these bilateral relations from mere relationship to strategic development and partnership in the area of trade, in the area of investment, cultural relations, and so many other things.
Thank you very much, Dr. Segun Bolarinwa. We will come back to you in the course of the conversation. Just before we bring in Dr. Gali Sherif one more time, I would like Charles Onaniju to just explain briefly an aspect of the reasons he was giving as to why there was a delay, of course, in the establishment of full diplomatic relations with China more than 10 years after Nigeria gained independence. And yet, Mr. Onaniju, at independence, Nigeria declared its non-aligned stance.
Yeah, yes, it was very obvious that Nigeria was ideologically shielded from engaging in China or the socialist bloc, including the Eastern European countries and the former Soviet Union, by former colonial master who retained considerable influence. Even though Nigeria has formally decolonized and become independent, remember, we were still having the private council in London as our Supreme Court up to 1963, and the whole outlook, both the public service, the civil service, the orientation of the elite was strictly Western. So this tradition was literally very deep. And what shocked us of this tradition was, like I said, the ambivalence of the West in coming to the support of Nigeria during the Civil War. I think this broke the back of the Western-centric foreign policy and provided the urgent need to rethink Nigerian multilateral engagement. Like General Gowon said, this was the background on which he began negotiation in the 60s, late 60s, that culminated in the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1971. And in 1974, of course, he visited China, the first Nigerian head of state to visit China, and in his words, had the rare honor to visit the legendary Chairman Mao in his residence and was well received. He spoke about the narrow road, the symbolic tunics, uniform almost everybody wore, and then showed excitement that 20 years after, or much years after, China was completely changed. So the delay, one is on account of Nigerian ideological orientation, protected essentially, shrouded in the Western sphere of influence. We are unable to take immediate stance on the need to diversify our foreign relations. But we were shocked out of this complacency by the event of 1967 to 1970. And the Nigerian political leadership took a very realistic stance in diversifying our global affair and then engaging China. But more importantly, I believe, the future of Nigerian-China relation belongs to the future, not even to the present. What we have seen in the present is even very marginal if we consider the opportunities. But these opportunities will have to be engaged strategically. Strategic engagement should not be strictly the initiative of China. What do we define as our strategic interest in deepening China-Nigeria relation? What would China get from Nigeria? These are strategic questions we should be asking. If we ask, we will find there is more to China building roads. For us, as important as it is, there is more to China building network. What can we also offer China? Have we taken account of the economy in the post-industrial stage, low-end products? Can we fill the gap? If we are the next industrial frontier at China was 50 years ago when it started reform and opening up, can we do what China did, become the next factory of the world, and even meet the requirement of China's low-end industrial products? Instead of producing. So this, if you're talking about strategic means understanding your deficiencies, appreciating your opportunities, and factoring them into policy network. That's what strategy is. And are we really seeing the strategy of engaging China beyond the next 50 years?
All right, Gali, that's an opportunity for you to leap in here. I mean, because everybody talks about the miracle of China after Deng Xiaoping opened up the economy. And today, China is the world's second largest economy, almost on the heels of the first. And we have seen how international relations have been altered dramatically on account of the rise of China. But what should be our own strategic interest in this relationship?
Yeah, the only strategic way out, for Nigeria and other African countries in this particular relationship is to be able to reciprocate, the gesture, showcased by China. Why? Because 2-3 years ago, President Xi Jinping was emphasizing on African countries bringing their own goods, even services, to China. China was ready to consume, what will be offered by African countries. And this apart, President Xi Jinping even provided a waiver in the Economic Expo, that was held in Shanghai, and other places, that those, charges that African countries were meant to be, to pay, these, have been waived. So this is a kind of motivation and encouragement for the African countries, including Nigeria, to actually make a shift in its strategic partnership in this particular trend. And what are those things that we need to do? We must embark on a massive industrialization. Why? Because without industry, you cannot produce. You cannot offer nothing. You continue to remain a consumer nation. So the first strategy that African countries have to make a Nigeria is to rapidly industrialize. And we have seen the future of this industrialization with the coming of the Chinese counselor, foreign minister to Nigeria. Most of the major 7 points he emphasized, aiding major projects in Nigeria to achieve its independent development objective has been part of that particular commitment between China and Nigeria. And to aid Nigeria in the industrialization process, China wishes to engage Nigeria as the general terms, signify on win-win cooperation and mutual benefit. And that is what distinguishes China-Africa relationship with any other continent or any other power in the world. Why? Because those with whom China and Nigeria have been economically romancing. They have shown no commitment, in the development of this particular continent. But with the coming of China, in barely just 50 years, that is just half a century, many boosts, have taken place, not only in Nigeria, but in the entire continent of Africa. So the first thing that Nigeria and African state must do is to embark on a massive industrialization process, because you cannot do without production. You cannot sell nothing without production. So if you produce...
What is the key to that industrialization? This is a passion for my colleague, Kirian. What is the key to that industrialization? Are we ready?
Yes, of course, because the only thing is you have agricultural practice in your own entity. So from agriculture, you try to involve that particular industrial development. And that is why now we are seeing made by China and Nigerian companies, because the coming together of Chinese and Nigerian companies to co-produce together, I think is a starting point to that particular industrialization. The establishment of free trade zones, the Lekki, the Ogun, Guangdong, free trade zones, in the country. These are also, stepping stones, for Nigeria to embark on its own massive industrialization. Why? Because sometimes there is the need to collaborate, and not to actually live in isolation, and not to actually believe that we can do it alone. So you can actually import some of these particular ideas as well as technical know-how. And that is why China is ready to work with Nigeria and other African countries to nurse this particular ambition and practicalize this particular plan in order to achieve such industrial development in Nigeria. And this particular co-production process between Nigerian and Chinese companies have, of course, opened market not only in Nigeria but in other African countries, because this particular goods, produced by this particular jointly planned companies, these items are being consumed in other African countries. And one fundamental issue that we must actually embrace at this moment is the launching of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, because this is also a background for Africa's industrialization and development. Why? Because we are going to see more collaboration, bilateral and individual state collaboration with China, because there is opportunity between China and African countries in this particular free trade area in Africa. Why? Because the areas in which each and every African country specializes in, depending on the natural resources, endowed by nature in that particular entity, then there can be a kind of strategic partnership and collaboration with China in order to harness these particular resources to provide industrial processes and production for that particular entity to be able to market and sell its own goods and commodities, not only to other African countries, but even to other societies around the world. And that is why at this moment, when the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was actually launched, there is a greater opportunity for China and African countries to honestly and sincerely collaborate together to harness the potentials that Africa has, in order to continue with its industrialization dream, as well as be able to boost and diversify the economies, of African entities for the betterment of Africa.
Thank you indeed. And the collaboration is talking about in terms of industrialization, I think it has even started, because we have some manufacturing companies in Nigeria that are, of course, collaborating with some individual Chinese corporations, and it is yielding a good result. Thank you. Let's return to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, you've had other guests here, speaking in favor of China and all the, strategic moves that China has made in Nigeria with respect to development, perhaps in many areas, such as construction, ICT, and trading. Now, you were explaining to us your own view about the 50 years of bilateral relations with your country when we had some audio issues. Now, you are back. Could you just continue from where you stopped and also speak to some of the issues raised by other guests here in the studio?
Okay. I think, especially in China, there is the old saying in China. If you want to get rich, build the roads first. I think the infrastructure construction is very important. And China, Nigeria, we have, in the area of trade, science and technology, social development, industry, agriculture, culture, education, and in many areas we have, very good cooperation. Especially in recent years, China and Nigeria have been deepening their cooperation. I can take an example in the year of 2018. In that year, CGC, a very famous Chinese local Chinese company, studied China
It looks again we've lost
the contact.
We've lost Mr. Lee there. Well, once we re-establish the contact, then we'll get back to him. Dr. Segun Bolariwa in Lagos Network Center, I would like you to also speak to aspects of the strategic relationship that Onaniju talked about in the studios. Okay, we are discussing 50 years of Nigeria-China relations. Onaniju says, look, from a strategic level, we should also be looking at the next 50 years. And he did say that if we are in the position today which China was 50 years ago now, before it became a global player, respected all around and much sought after, what should be the ingredients of our strategic relationship with China over the next 50 years? And I might add, if we say 50 years ahead, could we break those 50 years into, say, 5 decades? Over the next decade, what should be our strategic objective? In the next 2 decades, next 3 decades, and so on and so forth. Are we positioning ourselves to think this way and exploit the very warm relationships that we have at the moment for the beneficial interests of both countries?
Yes, thank you so much. In looking at the next 50 years or the decades ahead in Nigeria-China relations, in supporting Onaniju, I think Nigeria needs to redefine its engagement with China now. We should move beyond ordinary trade relations, which sincerely it has majorly been in favor of China. China has benefited more in the trade relations, and they have made so much revenue from the trade relations with Nigeria. They have gotten a very huge market in Nigeria, in Africa, and all of that. But Nigeria should also re-engage China to define what we need from China, what we want from China, and how we can benefit from China. And one of those things is also we should begin our own production too. We should begin to produce. We should begin to also export to China and other parts of the world. And like it has been raised earlier, Nigeria has huge potentials in agriculture. We can invest so much in agriculture. We can also improve in the area of our oil and gas. The major article of trade between Nigeria and China now that Nigeria takes to China is oil. So we need to move beyond the oil too. So we need to improve our agriculture so that we can be able to be producing at an industrial level whereby we can also export goods and services to China. Of course, China is far way ahead. But that is actually why we need to re-engage China, because China has it more than us. So we also need to, at this level, make China to understand that there should be transfer of technology. Technical know-how will benefit us more in these Nigeria-China relations. It will benefit us more. We need technical know-how. There should be transfer of technology. Technology can be stolen. Technology can be borrowed. Technology can be bought. But in engaging China effectively, positively, at this strategic level, Nigeria needs to try to re-engage China, redefine its relationship with China. China, this is what we want. China, can you help us in this area? China, you need to give us part of your technology to do this together so that we can also be exporting. For example, look at all this road construction going on. Look at the road construction going on. There have been these observations all over that China comes with artisans, the welders, the mechanics, all the people that work on these things. They bring them from China. Nigerians should be more engaged. If Nigerians are closely engaged, if Nigerians are well involved, by so doing, we are tapping from the technology. We are tapping from the technology. China should be ready to give out this technology too. China should be ready to transfer this technology. If Nigeria has the technical know-how, we can improve our agriculture. If Nigeria has the technical know-how from China, we can also improve in developing our industry. If our industry is developed and we have a lot of industrial complexes around, then we can also be able to improve the trade relations from the negative figure Nigeria has, and to improve it to a positive figure too, because China has been benefiting more from the trade relations. China has been benefiting more from the investment. Of course, Nigeria too, we are benefiting because in the investments in Nigeria, Nigerians are employed. In the investments in Nigeria, we are experiencing development. In the infrastructural development in Nigeria, our infrastructure is improving and we are enjoying it. But we also need to start exporting. We also need to be taking what we have, showcasing it around the world, including China. And so if that is done, if there is a more investment in agriculture, building more industries in Nigeria, and China trying or willingly ready to give us technical know-how, transfer part of the technical know-how technology to Nigeria, I think Nigeria will also be somewhere in the next few decades, say 50 years.
It is very interesting also to note that in some of the areas that are known to some of us with respect to engagement with China, they have offered a training of Nigerians. For instance, at the launch of Nigeria satellite, they offered training of Nigerians, you know, in that area. But what really happens is that when our men and women are trained and they return to Nigeria, what they offer to Nigerians, do Nigerians really take advantage of what they have? Because, of course, this issue of believing in what comes from abroad has always been by the bane of our development in this part of the world. Thank you indeed. Before we go back to Mr. Lee, let me return to Ononuju once more. He talked about re-engaging with China. Already we are engaged with China. And when he says re-engaging more strategically with China with respect to technology transfer and what have you, what do you understand by that? Does it really mean that the engagements we had with China over the years is not effective enough, you know, to take us where we want to be technologically and otherwise?
For me, re-engaging might be too hard. For me, it's a matter of reinterrogating our policy. Does it really spot and engage the opportunities that China offers? Let's engage not China. You can't engage. You can't review China policy with China. It is our domestic priority. It is our domestic prerogative to review our policy. If it is not delivering on concrete, if it's not delivering on concrete output we need, we reinterrogate it. And the first way to start is to begin to pay attention to China beyond the exotism that China presents, beyond the handshake, beyond the diplomatic finesse, beyond the, let's begin to understand China for what it is. What are the opportunities in China? Let me tell you something. Do we follow China? Do we study its papers? Do we follow the Communist Party of China holds congresses? That is the most definitive platform on which China policy in decades to come are explained. Do we follow it? Do we study it? Is it just diplomatic meeting with cameras all over the place? Do we do the hard work of finding out the opportunities that are objectively embedded in China and how we can exploit? Recently, I tell you, China has just outlined its 14th National Development Plan. In that plan, it outlined a new economic model, a new paradigm of economic development. It called it dual circulation. Dual circulation simply means we will concentrate, we will be more akin to holding forth to our domestic market. Of course, you know the whole thing about decoupling, the whole thing about isolating China. China said, we will depend more, since our economy, our contemporary economy is driven by consumption. Consumption about 1.4 billion people that are wealthy. Among them, almost 800 million middle class. By the way, China had the largest middle class in the world. We will, our primary concern, we will focus in growing our domestic economy. Our domestic market will be the key. And then we will allow the domestic market to reinforce the international market at the second, which is called dual circulation. And in this respect, China has held 3 import expos straight to expose the opportunities of China huge market to the world. And interestingly, in all these 3 expos, Nigeria was invited. I do not want to say, because I was at the 2 expos and I tried to find Nigerian pavilion, and to be very frank, it's nothing to write home about. You see Rwanda, you see South Africa, you see Uganda, you see Namibia, you see Kenya. But you can't find your country. China also held its first African Trade Expo in Honan in 2019. Nigeria also was a key country that was invited. So we can't spot these opportunities. The simple thing is, are we willing? China has offered a number of initiatives. The FOCAC process, which has been very successful. In 2016, FOCAC offered 10 points. President Xi Jinping offered 10 points understanding. Industrialization, infrastructure construction, agric modernization. And they're not taking this thing for granted. They provided $60 billion to support the execution.
I'm sorry to leap in here. My colleague Kirian is rapt listening to you, like the rest of us. Look, you have many more examples to give as to the strategic opportunities available to us. But you made mention of something, that the Chinese Communist Party is the fulcrum for articulating the policy direction of that country. What can the Nigerian policy planners and therefore Nigerian media also do into tapping into the Chinese reality or the Chinese mind, and therefore be in a position to communicate back to us? The reason I'm asking this question is as follows. When you hear about the Chinese Communist Party meeting, the first thing that comes to your mind is that, again, through the blinkers of Western media reportage, these are communists, non-democratic, they don't respect human rights. But the real substance that you are bringing out now, we don't have access to it.
Yes, but this is the most important thing, that we should break the net. We should break the net of this that has clouded our understanding of the real China. And this should be more than just diplomatic exotism. It should be more than that. We should study China. We should pay attention. Like they have just outlined their 14-year national development plan. Is our foreign ministry in hand? Do they have that document? Is somebody studying it? Do we have a network? Is our think tanks, the NIIA, from where our friend comes, the NIPS, are they studying these documents? This is the question. This is the question. In China, for one policy to be made, you need a lot of contribution from almost 20 or 50 think tanks. Do we have outreach to think tanks? If we maintain our posture of anti-intellectualism, anti-scholarship, how do we engage this process? Because this process is beyond what you see. It's policy issues that must be interrogated more seriously. And we need to build our bureaucracy, raise their competence. The competence we have 20 years ago, which made us central to international elections, especially the African region, may not suffice today. There is a critical shift, a fundamental shift. If you're waiting for another war to see a shift in global election, then you might have to wait forever. It's already happening. The pivot to the south, to the east, even United States talks about pivot to the east. The Pacific is the ocean of contemporary ocean of the future, not the Atlantic. Are we seeing this? Are we understanding that the bulk of global trade is within the Pacific, not the Atlantic? These are some of the issues that requires serious engagement, not just shuffling papers, not just paying courtesy call, not just making visits, and even we need to really seriously go to work, because China has offered a number of initiatives. The Belt and Road Initiative. What is our understanding of the Belt and Road Initiative? What is our understanding of the Belt and Road Initiative? These are critical things. That's saying we want to build a convergence. We want to build infrastructural connectivity. Where do we key in? And like I said, they are offering huge market of 1.4 billion people. Let me tell you, Namibia is exporting meat now. Kenya is struggling to export flour. And if they could just get 1% of Chinese wheat flour market, Kenya is on the go.
And we have this around the Jos area.
Yes.
That's horticulture.
Yes. Namibia is exporting meat.
And the Chinese...
Zambia is exporting honey.
The Chinese middle class is consuming wine.
Absolutely. South African SB Miller is one of the best brands in China. Taking advantage. So, have a niche. Where do you start?
Yeah. All right.
And to do this is beyond the glees.
These are very salient points that you have made, and as soon as we tap into all those strategies, of course, it will be better for the nation. Thank you, Charles Naluju. This is Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now. When we return, the conversation continues.
Although social media as a channel of communication is inherently harmless, it becomes harmful and damaging when used without discretion and thoughtfulness. Bad social media users spread rumors and fake news without verification. But good social media users stop, reflect, and verify information before sharing it. Be a good social media user. Stop the spread of fake news. Verify the authenticity of your source and use social media responsibly for a better Nigeria. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, in collaboration with the National Orientation Agency.
Mommy is ready to receive me a bundle of joy. Mommy is making my home cleaner and safer. We are Dettol sure. Daddy is home. He must be germ-free. He needs to be Dettol sure. My clothes are so nice. We are Dettol sure.
Illnesses can happen at home too. That's why Dettol and me together will make my baby's home safe and to protect from up to 100 illness-causing germs. That's why moms want to be Dettol sure.
We are Dettol sure.
A new edition of TV Guide is out with special focus on the game changer, His Excellency Governor Abdullahi Sule of Nasarawa State. Broadcasting in a digital economy, Maxwell Logo gives an insight. This edition also features Nancy Naji of AIT, a name synonymous with business. Meet the NCDC boss, Dr. Chikwe Ihekweazu. TV Guide, your indispensable companion, also x-rays the relevance of social media in the modern society. Meet some TV professionals who have impacted their spaces and other inspiring stories in sports, entertainment, and lots more. Grab a copy at the vendor near you or NTA stations nationwide. TV Guide, your indispensable companion.
Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
The broadcast media ecosystem is dynamic and requires continuous training for practitioners to perform optimally. NTA TV College Jos invites relevant officers to the following specially packaged training programs. Intermediate online news reporting skills. Date 1st March to 12th March 2021. 2 weeks. Studio lighting indoor and outdoor. Date 1st March to 5th March 2021. 1 week. Modern trends in broadcast media marketing. Date 15th March to 9th April 2021. 4 weeks. Understanding public service rules and mastering the art of standard minute writing, reports, memoranda, and briefs. Date 15th February to 12th March 2021. 4 weeks. The course fee for the 4-week courses is 100,000 naira per participant. The fee for the 2-week course is 80,000 naira, while the course fee for the 1-week course is 40,000 naira only. Accommodation inclusive. Venue for all the courses is the serene and secure environment of NTA TV College near Old Government House, Rayfield, Jos. For more inquiries, please call 0803-314-4383 or 0806-980-9807. NTA TV College, Jos, training you to be the best you want to be.
All right, you're welcome back, and you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We, of course, I must apologize that we haven't had the opportunity of getting to hear more from the Chancellor of the Chinese Embassy in Nigeria, Mr. Li Zhuda. Well, it's back again on the right side of your screen, as you can see there. He has some audio issues from his Zoom connection to us. Mr. Li, sorry, the program is running to a close, and our Nigerian analysts have done more in terms of indicating what Nigeria needs to do to accelerate the mutual benefits of our diplomatic relations. But I just would like you to touch on one important point now, because these are live issues. They have spoken from the strategic point of view, that's to say, in the next 10 years, 20, 30, up to 50 years. But let's deal with some of the issues of the moment. Mr. Li, what is it that both countries can do to improve the quality of products that come in from China to Nigeria? I'm asking this question against the background that we get to hear that, oh, Chinese manufacturers would produce according to specification. And yet, if you were to go to some advanced countries, I name the US for instance, you go to their shops and you see the labels made in China, these are what you refer to as grade A products. And yet, when you come here, you find substandard goods and even medicines coming from China. It appears that we are back to those years when goods from Taiwan were branded inferior. What can both countries do, and more particularly from the Chinese point of view?
Okay. And first, I can tell you that both countries, we are so happy at the great relationship between China and Nigeria. And when you ask for the Chinese, China-made, products made in China, I think for many Nigerians, I think some of them don't see the whole picture. We should look beyond the surface and see the truth. As we know, the market is a decisive force. The market is determined by the supply and demand. China has all kinds of products, some of them with very, very high quality, and they are expensive. And some of them have good quality, and they are cheap. And I think we always say you get what you pay for. This is the truth. For now, I think in Nigerian market, there is a large demand for those products with good quality and lower price. And also, therefore, many clever Nigerian, businessmen, they imported this kind of goods from China. And it's much easier for them to serve in local market and make a reasonable profit. I believe with the development of Nigerian society and the improvement of the living standard of Nigerian people, more and more high-end Chinese product will become popular in Nigeria. This trend is really decided by the market. I think, more and more, good quality and good products will come Nigeria. In regards to the COVID-19, I think as our Chinese President Xi Jinping announced at the 73rd World Health Assembly in last May, he said that COVID-19 vaccine, when developed and deployed in China and available, will be made a global public good and share with other countries. He further promised that at the extraordinary China-African Summit on solidarity against the COVID-19, that African country will be among the first to benefit. I think Nigeria is our good friends and our strategic partners. Nigeria surely among the first to benefit from the vaccine. In an effort to help the international community to fight against COVID-19, China has officially joined COVAX and is in close communication with WHO and other sponsors of the plan, working together to make a vaccine a global public good and make them more accessible and more affordable to the developing countries. Several days ago, China decided, to provide 10 million doses of vaccine to COVAX, mainly to meet the urgent need in developing countries. This is another important measure taken by China to promote the equitable distribution of vaccine, advance international cooperation in fighting the pandemic, and apply the vision of the community of common health for mankind. I think with our joint efforts, we work together with Nigeria, we finally will win the war against COVID-19. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lee, thank you very much. You have explained the view that, of course, you have a range of goods in China, high end and then low end, and then you get, of course, what you pay for. Nigerians want quality goods, but at a cheaper price. Some persons would argue that in the interest of your own national respect, as it were, in terms of quality of goods of origin, perhaps you can also regulate goods that go out of your environment, including medicines, which is why I'm sure you must have heard the views that some persons should be wary of certain kinds of drugs that come out of China. But there's another very significant point I would like you to address from a diplomatic point of view. Yes, Africa, and particularly Nigeria, we have seen an inflow of Chinese facilities, that is to say financial facilities by way of loans. And fears have been expressed that we probably will be back to the 1980s when we had a huge debt overhang arising from the London and Paris Club indebtedness that crippled our development for a couple of decades. Should Nigeria and other African countries who are, of course, listening to this conversation be afraid of debt from China, that's to say, owing China?
Yes, I think, for the COVID-19 vaccine and this thing, I think the most advantage of China COVID-19 vaccine, I think it's accessible. For China, COVID-19 vaccine, it can be kept at, room temperature for over a week. You can, put easily, in your refrigerator. It's from the 2 degree to 8 degree. It's very easy to send to, I think, many areas like Nigeria. You just use the cooler to send it to remote area, help people to get the, vaccine. I think this is the most advantageous, and it's also reliable. It's affordable. I think this year is a special year to mark the 50th anniversary of the bilateral ties of China and Nigeria. Both countries have made great achievements in all areas, like in the cultural, in the technical, science, agricultural, and educational. I can tell you, as a cultural counselor of the embassy, in cultural area, China, Nigeria, we just, your NTA, 2 days before, on the February 10th, the exact day to mark the 50th anniversary, you broadcast our joint show. It's shared the moment. The show is so good. It's jointly made by the Ministry of Culture of China and the Ministry of Information.
Mr. Lee, thank you. I would like us to take maximum advantage of the remainder of the time for this conversation because we had issues with your audio earlier on. The last question I asked you, which I would like, if you wish to address it, is should Nigeria and indeed the rest of Africa who are now taking loans from China be afraid of being indebted to China?
Sorry, the signal is not so good. I cannot catch you clearly. I think if you want to know about it,
we are borrowing from China. We are borrowing from China, and other African countries are also borrowing from China. Some analysts are saying, beware that this just might be another slavery. Should we fear loans from China?
This thing, I think, first, I want to say that, China, the loan, borrowed by Nigeria, the loan played a very positive role. It makes a great contribution to the infrastructure construction, and it, really help Nigeria to develop first. Like China, when in the 1980s, when China opened our own door, when we started our reform and opening up policy, we also borrow a lot of loan from other countries, including US, UK, Japan, many foreign countries. We borrow loan from them. At the same time, we use that loan. We develop very quickly. It's a win-win cooperation. This is one side I want to make clear. The other side, many people say the debt trap. I think it's nothing new. It's misinformation. And misinformation let people, misunderstand the real situation. I'm not the economist. I'm not the, expert on loan. But I think the loan is the China loan with very lower, interest rate. It's, in the world capital market, many people competing with each other. They want to get a loan from China. They want to develop their own country. I think it's a win-win cooperation. Thank you.
All right, a win-win cooperation. You just let us know that before China developed, China had to borrow money from other parts of the world. But let me just ask Mr. Nanujo on this issue of loan. Actually, many analysts believe that Nigeria is mortgaging the future of its citizens, by excessive borrowing from China, and perhaps the borrowed money, how they are directed in terms of development, is perhaps unknown. And in some areas where the money has been directed to, are we sure that in due course we'll be able to now be able to repay these loans?
Yes, like the Chinese Cultural Council said also, China is not new to borrowing. Even when they started the reform in 1978, the first thing was to design projects, turnkey projects, 8 railway lines, 10 seaports, power plants, and all that. And all this thing was funded by Japan, despite the historic hiatus between Japan and China. But China was realistic. But ironically, they were paid back in coal and oil, because China was a huge oil exporting and coal exporting country. They were paid back in that. So they were the foundation of contemporary China modernization. Like he said, they even engaged the West, despite the ideological differences. They engaged the West because that was realism. Modernization was the challenge. The objective challenge was to modernize, to drive economic reform, because the Cultural Revolution was an experience they would want to. Revolutionary rhetoric was not enough. There was a need to advance material production, and this was what they did. Yes. So I do not think many people, just like he has said, what Nigeria gets from China, these loans are tied to specific projects. These projects are closely synchronized.
Are there things we can learn from China in terms of national discipline to focus on what you want to do, how you want to do it, and then actually doing it and facing the consequences when you fail or neglect to do it?
Yes, there are so many areas.
Very quickly,
there are so many areas through which we can actually learn, to that particular respect. Just recently, there is what the Chinese call Sigachuan. Sigachuan simply refers to 4 comprehensives, which is a new philosophy, advocated by the current president, who is the core of the Communist Party, President Xi Jinping. He said the first thing is to make China a prosperous society. Then we can actually learn to make Nigeria a prosperous society.